No. Hi everyone, welcome back to CSharpCorner live show. This is an AM episode and we are joined by David today. Hi David, how are you?
Good. How you doing?
I'm great. How's the weather there? I mean, here at my place it's night. What about you?
It's really nice today. It's going to be it was kind of cool earlier this week, but now it's like
Mhm,
summertime. Summertime, at least
mhm.
for San Diego, which is about
Yeah.
it's going to be about 77 degrees today along the coast because I live by the coast, so it's always cooler. I don't know how
Mhm.
many Celsius that is, but yeah, so it's going to be a warm day for us.
That's great. So this episode is about AMA. We're going to talk about code quality. We're going to talk about performance, and we're also going to talk about the MVP program and a lot more that you will bring your years of experience in this live show. David, we all know you have been a very frequent flyer to India for annual conferences. You write. You are a featured columnist on C Sharp Corner platform, but still as the format, I mean, I would request you to give a short introduction about yourself, and then maybe we can go ahead and start the show.
Sure. Yeah. So for those of you who don't know me, David McCarter, .NET Dave. I've been a professional software developer for over 26 years now. I'm a Microsoft MVP. I'm a CSharpCorner MVP. I've won a bunch of awards. I'm a patented inventor. What else? I've written more books than I can count or can remember anymore. I just released one this week.
Hmm.
And
Yeah,
I plan to do two more this year.
that's great.
So,
That's amazing. And one thing, David, that you missed from your introduction is like you love to play guitar.
oh yeah,
You're a rock star, right?
yeah, and during
Yeah.
during the pandemic, I've been playing a lot more guitar, uh, and
Hmm.
I even bought myself a
A
Father's
new
Day
one.
present. This is my
Oh,
Father's Day present to myself.
yeah.
One of the guitars that I've always wanted my entire life, ever since I started playing around with guitars, is I've always loved the sound of a 12-string guitar.
Okay.
And it sounds really different. And and I just never bought one, and I don't know why. And now that I've had it for 5 days, I'm kicking myself, going, why haven't I
Definitely, we were missing that from a long time.
bought this guitar? So anyway, I'm
Yeah.
learning some new songs. I'm reworking a couple songs to sound better on a 12-string guitar. And
Hmm.
so that's what I do for fun.
Yeah. I have one guitar over there, David. It's that I got it from a hackathon, and I really don't know how to use it. I think maybe my fingers are too small. I can just cannot put it on the strings, so I'm really struggling with that. It's been an year. It's over there, so maybe when we meet next time, we're surely gonna have one session on how beginners for guitars, right? We're usually gonna
Well,
talk about that.
let me give you some encouragement.
Mhm.
Have you ever heard of the band AC/DC?
Exactly, I've heard it. I've heard many songs in my school time. Yeah, high
Right.
school.
So the Angus brothers, who are the two guitarists for
Mm-hmm.
AC/DC, are like 5 foot 2 inches. They're very short. And so are their hands. Their hands are very small. And if you
Mm-hmm.
watch them play, they don't play full chords like I can do with my hands. They play differently because their hands are small, right? So
Okay.
don't let that discourage you. Okay. There's lots of well-known guitarists out there with small hands. So
Mm-hmm.
keep doing it. You have to work your hands and get them in to be able to do things, right? But that takes work.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's well said, and let me take it from there, David. Like you said, to not discourage yourself, keep on working. So you have been into this software development for a really, really long time, David, right? I was just reading your bio. It's so big, right? I think your bio is filled. When I just go to C Sharp on a platform, it just filled, and it says more than 26 years of experience do you have, right? So from the very first day as a software engineer to what you are here now, definitely with many Microsoft awards that we're going to talk about today in the later session. What are the different challenges that you have faced in the early stage, and what are the things that you would like to suggest to all guys watching today?
Yeah. Well, and I've been writing about this recently, actually. I think I've written about it. Oh, I wrote about it in my new book. That's where I wrote it. I thought I wrote it in a C#Corner article, but I just wrote it in my new book. But the biggest challenge that I had and other developers have, it's still to this day, is, for example, if they go through a computer science degree for 4 years and they come out of computer science degree and they want to go to work. Well, the problem is they don't really have any experience, right? And so the question I got a lot when I was teaching at a university here in San Diego was, how do I get a job? And I say, well, you need experience. Well, how do I get experience? Well, you need a job. It's like the chicken before the egg or the egg before the chicken kind of thing, you
Yeah.
know. So this is a big problem, and not only that, but I will say publicly, and hopefully there's schools and universities listening to this, but at least in America, the universities and schools here aren't helping the developers with this problem at all. Most developers come out of a computer science degree with absolutely no real experience of building a real app from beginning to end, right? So my suggestion always, during the 26 years I've been a software developer is, and someone tweeted this a couple of days ago and they don't agree with this statement, but my statement is you have to be working on stuff at home always, right? And I don't care how long you've been a software developer, you need to do that. I do it now, right? I did it back then when I was a nobody in this world, and I'm doing it now that some people know me in this world, right?
Yeah.
I've never stopped that practice because that's the best way to learn new ideas, play around with things, get some experience, right? And so for me, in the beginning, and I've already written about this in a C#Corner article, is, for me, what that did was, like, the second program I ever wrote on my own, right, was somehow picked up by the most popular computer magazine in America at the time, and it's called PC Magazine. And somehow they found my program and they reviewed it, right? And which was awesome because they gave it a good review. So my orders shot up from like 10 a month to 10 a day for a while, right? And I was selling that 25 years ago for $25, US dollars. And so anyway, that really gave me a lot of experience. So what I'm trying to get to is that, those programs I wrote in the beginning at home, and I released them to the world, and had other people use them and pay for them and all that, that gave me more experience than any class could, right? And so what I did with that was, when I was a beginner, because this happened, that review happened barely a year since I was a professional software developer, right? And so what that did was not only give me a lot of credibility, but when I walked into companies and I could show them what I've written and it works, and people
Yeah,
are paying, and people are
yeah,
paying for it, right? I got the job every single time I did that practice. It never failed me ever. And that's why I write about it a lot, because this is how you fix that problem, right? And for me, being, interviewing software developers for 26 years, when they come and interview in front of me, I love to see that, right? Because it shows me that they take their own initiative to do something, right? And it shows me they actually did it, right? And so, though that one practice will really help people, especially in their beginning years, right? Now I don't take software into, interviews anymore because I'm too high level nowadays, right? I'm more of an architect or trainer or something like that, right? So I don't have to do that anymore, but I still do that practice at home now, right? And that's, and one of those applications that I've been working on, I'm going to be doing, a 2.5 hour session about it next Tuesday at the local user group here in San Diego. So, that's my best advice, especially for beginner developers.
Well, that's well said, David. I mean, something that you can show to an interviewer, not just an A4 size resume that would just go and just print it or just email it. Nowadays, I think it has been very easy. We all have internet access. We have platforms like GitHub, CSharpCorner, where you can go and put your code, write articles, and globally people can see it. I definitely know you had very different challenges then, and now things have been very easy to the new guys coming. And definitely that is something the lot, not just in US, David. I think it's globally in most of the region. I'm a recent graduate. What we study in computer science engineering in the classroom is very different than what we are being expected when we go to the IT companies and for our
Yes.
very first job. So I would definitely agree with that. I have struggled a lot, and I know, especially this time, the guys were graduating class of 2020, they're having a very tough time. It's very challenging for them to go and get job because they just cannot go out. Everything has to be virtual. Adding to that, David, you did mention now you have moved to a very, very senior level, that is in architecture, right? You talk more about that. And let's talk about who is in architecture. What is a day in the life of an application architecture or a solution architect, and how does all things fall in place when you work as an architecture?
Um, let me see. Let me talk how it should happen. At least,
Yeah,
and
yeah.
which always doesn't happen a lot. Unfortunately, what I've seen, in the past 10, 15 years, especially with the adoption of agile at some teams, is that even less and less architecture is being done. And even at some contracts I work on now, I have to basically pound my hands on tables going, we need to architect this first, before we just sit down and start writing code, right? So I think, a normal day in the life of someone who's more of an architect slash coder, there are some architects that really don't code at all, right? I think that's probably not a good idea. But usually what architects do is they're knowledgeable in the full stack, as they say, right? They know how the front end works, the middle, the back, everything. They basically can see the whole picture like I can, right? I can always see the big picture when it comes to any software development. And then, it's up to them, because they know that, hopefully they have a bunch of experience. then they work with like the business leaders, the people dealing with the customers, and take all those kind of requirements, and then sit down and come up with a solution that's going to work for everybody and be sustainable for the future. Right. This is one thing I talk a lot about in my articles, even some articles that I'm writing right now for you guys that I haven't sent to you yet, is that, too many people think about the now, not the future. Right. And so architects also need to worry about the future too. Like when you architect something, you don't architect it for now, you architect it for 5 years from now. Right.
Yeah.
And so people that architect don't do a lot of coding. Hopefully they do some coding, but they do more of the big picture, coming up with the design, writing the documentation, writing the diagrams, all those kind of things, right? And like I said earlier, usually architects are developers who've been doing it for a long time, right?
Yeah.
And especially myself. Oh, go ahead.
Yeah. I was just gonna ask that how long it takes to be a solution architect. You can just go ahead and answer that and carry on.
Well, that's tough. I think that's really up to the individual and their situation and even where they live, right? Because, I was an architect, I was architecting, I architected an entire brand new website for the number 2 flower delivery company in America, right? Only 6 years after I became a professional software developer.
That's very soon.
Yeah. So I've been architecting ever since that time, basically, right? And so I guess it really depends on the person. And one thing that I have said in articles is, a lot of people used to come up to me when I ran my user group, and they would come to me and say, Dave, how do you know all this stuff? How do you know how everything works? And the simple answer to that is I go to my own user group meetings every month.
So you get a lot of questions over there, right?
Well, no, not a lot of questions, but by just going to a user group meeting, I'm not talking about speaking. I ran the user group. I ran the user group, so I didn't speak a lot, right? But by just going to a user group meeting, even if you're not super interested in the topic, at least you'll hear it, and maybe it'll be interesting sometime in the future. But because I went to my own user group every month for 20 years, basically, right, is how I could see the big picture. Because the good thing about user groups, at least in America, is you get people from outside of your community that come and speak. So you get lots of different opinions and ways of looking at things, and people that know maybe certain types of architecture better than you do in your area, right? So you get this big rounded experience by going to user group meetings. So if there's one thing I can suggest, go to your local group meetings. I'm not sure what they're called in India, but go every month.
Yeah, that's great. I think learning from the community, not just work from 9 to 5 in any of the IT company or organization, going to local user groups, meetups, now virtual conferences really adds value. And that is something any new software engineer or someone who has 6 to 7 years of experience, I think that is something people should really do. And you do a lot of community work, David, right? You write articles, you also make videos. No. You also know you do a lot of blood donations. We have seen that, right, on your social media. There's one question coming from the comments. Would you like to take it? It is the first one that talks about the design patterns. Let me bring it to the screen so that you can see
DDD
it.
or TDD?
Yeah. What design patterns do you recommend for your projects? Is it DDD or TDD or something else?
I think I usually lean towards DDD more than a test-driven development. I think it's mostly just because maybe of where I live. Unfortunately, most teams I go into either have no tests or very few, right? So the teams, at least where in my area, certainly don't do a lot of TDD. Now, I have some friends in this area that speak about it a lot, but at least here it just hasn't caught on a lot, unfortunately, right? But then I see people taking TDD too far, right? And like with every technology, you have to find what works for your project and your team, right?
Yeah.
And it's not one extreme or the other. Sometimes it's a combination of the two, right? And
Exactly.
I worked at one company where they had to have 100% code coverage, on their code, and even Microsoft doesn't recommend that, right?
Yeah.
Microsoft recommends about 75%, right? But if you didn't write a unit test for every single thing, they basically got upset at you and stuff like that. So that's taking a little too far, if you ask me.
Yeah.
So I just want a happy medium. I just want to see just people doing unit tests, and I don't see that a lot, right? So anyway, the answer is I lean towards DDD more than TDD, but I think, like I said, it's because of my area where I live. But again, it's like everything in software engineering, you have to find what works for your project and your team, right? And make adjustments.
Yeah, exactly. Well said. I think there's no particular rule or there's hard and fast rule for that. Even in the same team, in the different projects, they may be having a different approach for same team working on multiple projects. So that is definitely well said. A lot depends upon the current scenario on what different kind of projects they're working. One more question we have from Diago, David. I think now the question has started coming, right? The moment you gave an introduction, the question has started coming now. Oh, you got that mug, right? Let's talk about
Hey,
that mug.
one of my friends is online. One of my teammates is online.
He's the one.
No, he's the one that said obfuscate. Maybe he wants me to talk about obfuscation, because I think I was talking about it to somebody this week about that. So
Okay, so all right, so we'll surely talk about that too. Okay, so we have one question from Diago is asking that what are your strategies to fix something you missed in the architectural design at the beginning while minimizing the impact? I think this is a very practical question, right? This is something that even a software developer might feel like he's adding a feature, but just to minimize the code, he would just forget something. So how do you manage this, David?
well, this is tough because it really depends how well it was architected in the beginning.
You just fix it, right? You just fix it.
Right.
That's simple.
But unfortunately, and this is one thing I talk a lot about, and I'll be talking about on Tuesday at the user group meeting, is proper layered architecture, right? Back in the beginner days when I was a beginner here in San Diego, I learned, the big architecture back then was called N-tier architecture. And I still use that architecture today with everything I write, basically. And it's one of those things you learn and it just doesn't go away because it's such a great design, right? So if they used like my way of going towards architecture, then fixing something towards the end will be pretty simple, right? But if you didn't follow good architecture practices like layering your application, right, that fix can be catastrophic to the point where you can't do it, right? And I've been on projects like that too, where something comes up at the end and we say, well, do you want to delay the release by 3 months? No. Okay, we're going to go with what we have and fix it later, right? But unfortunately, the problem with looking at things like that is those things don't get fixed, right? And then they just start piling up on each other until the point where the program just, you can't do anything with it anymore, right? So to minimize the danger of changing is always good architecture up front. And I mean written down, diagrammed architecture, not talking about it in a meeting.
Yeah. Often this really happens, right? I mean, they would talk
Yes.
about, hey, this, yeah. I mean, people would just go and just bluff about, hey, these things can happen. We should, these are the best practices, and people usually don't follow while developing the application. So I think that really something lacks. But and I really liked your point that you say that, hey, you should follow basic principles, some of the best practices, so that even if you have a last minute changes that you need to do, your application architecture is good enough to support any of the changes or modifications so you need, right? And this is, I think, that will come through the experience and just following very simple basically that you said you should have layers, you should have a very good diagram, a better approach. So nothing special, Diago, just follow basic principles and make sure that your architecture is good enough to support any more additional functionalities or just support any of the bugs that they have. We have
Yeah, and
one
that's
more question.
I do want to follow up
Yeah.
really quick on that, and that is,
Mhm.
the layering of the applications. There have been many times where things have happened that other layers of that app didn't even need to change. Let me give you an example. So one time I
Okay.
was working for a cell phone company here in San Diego, and they manufacture cell phones. And the project I was working on was using SQL Server as the back end, and so I wrote the project using SQL Server with my architecture layers, right? And then one day, the manager comes in and says, "Well, our company's decided we hate Microsoft, so now we're going to use Oracle," right?
Oh my goodness.
And
Who
yeah,
says
so
that?
no, it happens a lot, unfortunately. But so they said, okay, now you need to change this to Oracle. I said, okay, right? I changed the data layer. None of the other layers needed to change at all.
Mhm.
Just the data part, which is the very bottom of the layers, right? So
Yeah.
when you architect like that, making changes to a specific layer or part of a layer is a lot easier and not uh, harmful to the rest of the project. Yeah.
That's great. I think you were supposed to change only with the entire data, although you had changed the entire database, but you made change only for a particular layer so that all the other different layers of the application is not affected. And then eventually your entire application was working
Yes.
very smoothly, right? Again, following the very basic principles of the solution architect.
Right.
All right. So we'll take more questions, right? We'll definitely take more questions. One we
Oh,
have from,
by the way,
yeah.
thanks for the
Oh,
coffee cup.
I hate you, David. I don't have one.
See, it says,
I do have. I do. Yeah, you can get it. I'll just bring one. I do have one for me too, but this one is exact. You see?
I like that one.
Yeah, yeah. So we're gonna get you on a coffee with pros too. In the recent time, we will come up with a coffee with pros where we're gonna talk a lot more informal and discuss about your guitar strings and your video animations that you do. That would be fun, right? Coffee with pros would be fun. It won't be technical, so
Yeah.
that would be great. Okay, David. There's one question coming from Andrew, right? I think this is not related to architecture, but he's actually, as you mentioned, really important subject with the roles and the principle of the solution architect is that you don't have to just create the architecture for current scenario. You have to think beyond. You have to think of a future on how long this project will go. If there's a requirement of scalability, right? You need a lot more expansion. Your application should be able to support that. There's one question that just maybe follow along with that is Andrew's asking, do you think Blazor is worth of the 5 years view? I think maybe if he's developing an architecture that is based on Blazor, so he's thinking, is that the right Blazor is the right thing? What are your thoughts on that?
So I've been really, really interested in Blazor since I
Hmm.
first heard about it at the MVP summits before you guys heard about it, and
Yeah.
and I've actually been working with the PM on the team, and I will be talking about Blazor next Tuesday at the user group meeting. And the reason, my personal reason I'm excited about Blazor is because I don't need to write JavaScript because I hate JavaScript. So
Well, you've just now disappointed many
I
viewers
know, I know.
watching.
I'm sorry. I'm sorry. Um, but it gets us out of that business of dealing with JavaScript and all of its nuances, in different document object models and things like that. So anyway, to answer the question is, yes, I do think Blazor is worthy of the 5-year review at this point. What I've seen Microsoft doing with Blazor, I think is very promising. I mean, not all of it works yet, but what I have seen is very, very promising. It alleviates, especially for the UI developer, or maybe a developer who's not great at JavaScript like me, it allows us to do very interactive, dynamic websites very easily, right? But, the one thing I want to say when talking about Blazor, I want to go back to architecture a little bit and say that Blazor is just the top level of the architecture, right? There's lots of other layers underneath Blazor, right? So if you architect all the other layers correctly, then if something better comes out, Blazor, or who knows what's going to come out in 5 years, you only need to change the top part. You don't need to change the rest of the application, right? Too many people write everything in the same project, right? That's not architecture. You never ever put everything in the same project ever, right? You always separate them out into different projects and different solutions. So my answer is yes. I think Blazor shows a lot of promise, and I'm looking into it. So that means I really believe in it at this point.
All right. So we had AMA on Blazor, I think maybe a couple of months back in the early May month. He was Michael Washington. He was from Seattle again. I'm not sure if you know him. He's a Microsoft MVP.
I know Michael.
Yeah. He had an amazing section on Blazor. Let's talk a little about Blazor. I'll just ask that you just said that you don't like JavaScript, and I've seen many Blazors guys. I mean, I'm not just hate JavaScript, but it's a lot more preferred when people coming from C# or a .NET background, when they get hands-on Blazor, they feel like, why did they work on JavaScript for so long, right? So the guys who have not worked on Blazor, right, who may not have a C# or .NET background, how would you explain them what Blazor is for a developer, and how easy it is to get started with Blazor? Because I personally know that if you go ahead and start using frameworks like Angular or React, they come with tons of boilerplates, right? Even if you just go and create a project, there are so many codes that you really cannot understand. Whereas for a Blazor, you just have very, very small codes, and it does most of the things. So how would you like to explain the benefits of Blazor to the guys who have not worked on it?
Well, to me, the biggest benefit of Blazor is that, so I don't upset too many JavaScript people, Blazor doesn't mean you can't use JavaScript, right?
Yeah.
You can still use JavaScript all you want, right? And there's no, you can still do that if you want to, but the thing is, doing things like calling services and database, well, you shouldn't be calling databases from Blazor, but calling services and things like that is so much simpler and safer if you choose the server version too, right? And so, to me, you can get a lot done with Blazor without even touching JavaScript, but the capability is still there if you want to do something really weird and wacky and, innovative that, maybe Blazor doesn't support, right? But, does that help? I'm not sure.
I think that really helps, and that adds the value, because you say if you are working on Blazor, it's totally fine. And when you're working with Blazor, you can also work on JavaScript, right, at the same time. So it's totally fine that if whenever you want to switch something, or you want to do something that is very weirdo, right, you can just move to JavaScript, right?
So the thing that I forgot to mention, if people haven't used Blazor yet or have really looked into it, is that, all that stuff you used to write with JavaScript, you now write with C#, right? So for developers like myself, that's a lot easier for me to do, right? Because, I kind of moved away from the front end and went towards the back end, quite a number, about 10 years ago, right? And those 10 years, I've forgotten most everything I knew about JavaScript, right? So I've been waiting for Blazor so I don't have to learn JavaScript just to do things, right? So
Yeah.
and the other sign that Blazor is going to be around is that there's a lot of third-party companies now supporting Blazor, like DevExpress and Grape City and Telerik. They all have Blazor controls out there. So if they're putting effort into making controls, that means it's going to be around a while.
Yeah, and David did just something off of the track. I remember you coming with a Grape City merchandise at CSharpCorner conference. I really remember that. I have T-shirts and stickers still with me, so I really miss the conference. You all are coming. I hope we can do that in the coming 2021. That
Yeah,
we really
and
need to
speaking
be.
of the conference, I'm to all my Indian friends out there. I'm really sad it didn't work out this year. Um,
Mhm.
you know, um, I always look forward to going to India. I love the developer community and how warm developers are in India. And I don't look forward to the travel part. You've probably read that, but
Yeah.
I love being there and I love being around the developers, and I really miss that this year.
We also know that the venue is one of your favorite.
Yeah.
That goes
Oh,
unsaid, right?
for this event, I almost went and got my Indian shirt and put it on, but I ran out of time.
That's okay. The background is right. I can get that.
Yeah.
Then, yeah,
This is actually one of my covers to my guitar amps. I put it over my guitar amp to keep dust off of it.
that's so cool. We'll come back. Let's come back. We'll definitely talk about conference and every part in towards the maybe like in 10 more minutes. There's one a question coming from Deepa. I think you did discuss in your early conversations that is it required to start your journey as a developer or have fundamentals to become an architect, right? But do we need a professional organization or else a professional network is enough?
Is it all? Is it all time card to start generating from developers to an architecture? So is he asking? Are you required to go from developer to architect?
Yeah,
Is that what he's asking?
yeah, she's just trying to
Oh,
know
she's
that is
asking.
it necessary to have those 7 years of developers, then you become a team lead, then you spend some time, you become a solution architect. Just trying to ask that is that path necessary, or nowadays the guys have become freelancers, they don't work in IT company full time. So she's maybe just asking that is that how it even works, or one has to follow that process.
Um, I would say the better architects follow that process, right? It's
Hmm.
it's when that question first came up, it kind of reminded me of when I was in the United States Navy, right? And
Yeah.
you know, uh, so there's two ways to go in the military. Either you're an officer or you're not, right? I didn't do the officer part, right? But the officers usually go through Naval Academy for 4 years. They get a college degree. They come out of that degree, and they get assigned to ships and other places as managers. But usually they're horrible at it, right? Because they have no experience, right? Yeah, they have the training. I mean, they have the schooling, but they have absolutely no experience of actually how to do it, right?
Yeah.
So I'm not saying you can't just be an architect from the get-go. I'm saying that I would say the better architects come from the ground up, because you kind of need to understand how everything works before you get to the architecture part. You know what I'm saying? Does that make sense?
Yeah, I get that. Yeah,
Yeah. Yeah.
definitely. Yeah, it definitely makes sense because you just cannot go ahead and say that, hey, I'll become a solution architect, do a couple of certification, and that's all, right? So you have to have there's always a better approach. I mean, the standard approach that the organizations may follow. Just the way it says degree is not important. Degree is not very important to get you a job, but it sometimes adds a value to your resume. In the same
It
way, I
does.
mean, if you yeah, in the same way, if you are working in an IT company for 6 to 7 years, you've become a team lead now. You have been working very closely with the solution architect, right? And you understand that approach. So definitely that is going to help you out. And I know
Yeah.
things are changing. It's working from home has changed. So there may be some changes, but I think the basic principles will remain the same, just the way you said, David. I think there's some best practices that this industry follow, and for the solution architect, I think there's that is something usually everyone would follow that, right?
Yeah. So to take it, kind of say it quickly in a different way, that's
Yeah.
like going and getting your car repaired by a person who has no idea how to build an engine, right?
Oh my goodness, you don't want that.
Right. Why would you want that, right?
All right. So yeah, so definitely, Deepa. I think if you have the talking about the best approach, go get in and work in an IT company, work on really good projects, understand not just the coding but the architectural level. There's a lot happens just then building a project, the pipeline and all. There's a lot that goes in a project, and you will learn all that while you work in an IT
Yeah.
company. That will help you build up your skills. We'll come back to one question that's being asked about the layered application, that says, can you tell me more about layered application and how you design those? That is, tell about an old project which was really complicated. I think you might come up with many examples, but let's choose something that is pretty easy to understand in this live show.
So the layered architecture really comes to me from the N-tier architecture design that was developed a long time ago. And that's just separating, and back 15, 20 years ago, we did it for different reasons than we do now, partially. But, it's basically separating out the major components into completely separate, decoupled layers, right? And so, the bottom of all architecture is the data layer, right? And that's what I'll be talking about Tuesday is, without a proper foundation, the rest of your layers are going to not be very good, right? So the data layer is very, very important. So you have the data layer on the bottom. Then on top of the data layer, you have your business layer. That's where your business rules go. That's where your business models go. That's where, in my cloud app, that's where my Azure functions go, right? That's where I use queues, Azure queues in my business layer. So that's the business layer. So all the business stuff is supposed to be in that layer. And when I talk about layers, the layers can be multiple projects, right? It doesn't have to be one project, right? So you have data layer, you have your business layer. On top of your business layer, you have your communications layer, right? Because the data's got to get out somehow, out of the server somehow, whether it's internal or external, it's got to get out somewhere. So that's the communication layer, right? On top of the communication layer is the user experience layer. Sorry, my hands are going off the screen. So on top of the communications layer, you have the user experience layer. That's, like using Blazor or WPF or something like that. And sorry, my screens just went blank. So that's where you have your presentation layer. And then on my diagram, you can see my diagram on CSharpCorner. To the side is what I call the identity layer. And that's, where you do authentication, authorization, all those kind of things. So if you separate out those big chunks like that, right, then changing any one of those layers is pretty easy. And they can actually be deployed separately too. It doesn't have to all be deployed just because you change one layer, right? Mm-hmm. So that's my basic approach. So whenever I look at writing any type of app, I don't care what type of app it is, right? I start with that architecture and then I modify it based on kind of things like we were saying in the beginning of this session about, the user requirements, the business requirements, all those kind of things. Those are relatively easy. Now, back in 20 years ago, we used to separate things out so we could, forget what they call it. We basically run multiple processes in separate machines, right? We did it that way, which we still can. We still do, like using Azure functions, things like that. But back then we were using something differently to do that. But so I've always followed that design, and even the project, my teammates we're about to release any day now. That's exactly the way I designed that project. And I've already gotten compliments on how easy it is to change things.
That I think one of the best approach that you have is always you allow your architecture is quite easy to have changes and modifications, right? I think that is what I'm getting from your this AMA is
Yes.
that you have really worked on that area. Is that if there's any new update or change coming, your applications really supports well. So
Yes.
I think that that is something people should really take from this AMA and show. We will take one more question and then we will definitely talk about MVP program. Right, we are almost at 45 minutes. We have only 15 minutes left, and I know you can talk about MVP program for really long. So we'll
I
just take
can.
this question. We'll
Well, I've
take
been
this
one for
question from
14 years now. So, yeah.
so 1 minute for each. So we are still left with 1 minute, right? So we'll take one question from Bhaskar. He says, "How to migrate an existing architecture to a new architecture without affecting business?" I think this is a very important question, and I think he may be asking about some of the best practices that you may follow, right?
Yeah. So before I give you the answer, try to come to my session on Tuesday because I'll be talking exactly about this on Tuesday in more detail. But anyway,
You can share the link, David, in the private chat. I can
I'm
put it
just
in the comments.
just go to my website, .nettips.com. It's right there towards the top of the page, and you can check it out.
Okay.
It's the San Diego .NET user group next Tuesday. And it's earlier than this meeting. Sorry, it's late at night, so I don't know what time it's going to be there. It's going to be like 5 a.m. there, I guess. But so the way to architect, let's say you have a single layer design, which a lot of people still do, right? And you listen to me or other people and you go, okay, maybe this isn't the best design. Let's start moving to another design. The best way to do that is to just start chunking pieces of it out, right? And then slowly moving processing to those pieces. For example, the first one I would tackle, of course, would be the data layer. I would take all the data work, all the data access in the project, move it to a data layer and just call that project now. That's not super hard to do, right? And then you can just keep going up the stack, like that. But if I'm answering it correctly, that's the way you do it. You just can't stop and do a whole new architecture. No business is going to allow you to do that because they won't make money during that process, right?
Yeah.
So you have to start chunking pieces of it over, right? And I think maybe on the contract I'm working on right now, we're going to do that with a new project. But basically just identify the pieces that can be easily moved out and then start moving those pieces out until you get the whole thing re-architected, right?
Yeah.
Does that
So
answer
I
it?
think, yeah, I think if I'm getting it, what you're trying to say is don't just stop your existing
No.
architecture and just start working on the new one, right? You need to find the one that are easy to migrate, create chunks of it, add it to the new one, and eventually you will be able to migrate a lot more easy. And if there are any changes to be done in the meanwhile, you can definitely do that, right?
Yes.
And if anything goes wrong, you can always go back because you have
Yes.
not entirely cracked on those your previous architecture. So I think that is how Bhaskar David would answer your
Yeah.
questions.
And the
Uh,
other thing I would like to add is, when you do migrate, let's say you have an application in .NET Framework 4.6 and you want to migrate, I definitely wouldn't probably migrate to .NET Framework 4.6, right? I
mhm.
would migrate to .NET Core because that's where the future is, right?
Yeah,
So I would definitely start looking at pieces like that. Now I know that's going to change with .NET MAUI, but right now, that's the way I would do it.
that's perfect. That's perfectly well answered. We'll again there's the moment I said this is the last question, there's again one that pops up. Right. So people all right. So let's go ahead and answer this. Okay, this is the last one we're answering, right? Can you talk about the clean architecture? I do not actually understand what he's trying to say with the clean architecture,
I'm
but
not. I don't
maybe
either. Can you add something else? Because I'm not
yeah,
sure what you mean by clean
will you
architecture.
please add? I mean, I clean architecture, I think he's maybe there's some best practice we did discuss in last 45-50 minutes, like some of the best practices and the principles that you should follow so that your architecture can support scalability, adding new features, if there are any more changes that you need to do, something didn't go right. So we have discussed that in last 50 minutes. So if you want to ask anything specific, you can surely drop your questions. David is still here, and we're not gonna let him go any soon, right?
Yeah. Oh,
All
and
right, so
also
David.
everybody, but just before I forget again, everybody who's on the call or will watch this later, if you want more specific architecture help and things like that, please email me, because I am always looking for ideas to do to write articles for CSharpCorner. So if you send me a question and I really like it, then I'll write a whole article about it and put it on CSharpCorner to answer it. So I need those ideas.
That's so nice of you, David. I think you're doing a really great job as a community guy, right? And I think you started all this when I was maybe in kindergarten, or definitely, right? You are one of the very senior person that we have from the community, not just in C Sharp Corner, but the entire ecosystem of Microsoft and your region too. Let's talk about David. As an MVP, right? You hold a couple of MVP awards. What is an MVP, right? How do you act? One question that I really ask to the MVPs is that from a very tight schedule, David, how do you really get time to write an article and contribute to the community, and that also for so long? I mean, I would really like to know that.
Well, I mean, I make time for it because I feel it's really important to me, and I've written about this too, especially in my earlier books back in the late 90s, is that, ever since I became a software developer, I've had a huge need to help other software developers. I'm not sure where that really came from. I kind of wish it would go away. Not really. But I love helping other people, right? Because my whole thing is I want to help people in their careers so they can provide for their family and all those kind of things. That's my driving goal. It's not to be popular. I don't make any money doing this. I lose money doing this, right? So I do it to help people. That's why, I ran my user group for 20 years. I taught at a university for almost 18 years. It's because, I put a priority on that because, it makes me feel good to help other people. So I make time for that, like sometimes I'll carve out a whole morning, like on a weekend, and that's when I'll write my article and things like that. So I carve out time to do that. Yeah.
Yeah, I think you talked about weekend. It is Saturday morning, right? We are disturbing you on Saturday morning. That's weekend.
And it's a
I think,
holiday.
oh, that's 4th of July, right? It's a holiday, and you have given your time, so we really appreciate that. Having said that, David, when you say you are an MVP, right? You say you contribute to the community. One way that we have seen during this pandemic that people come and do live shows, right? What other ways you have contributed in past all the years, and what are you would suggest someone to get started? Because the reason I say is because David, if you ask someone to go ahead and write an article, not everyone will be able to do that, right? Because not everyone can go ahead and start writing articles. Because if I would just go, I've just started my career, I may not be able to good at that. So how a beginner or maybe a project manager should go and start contributing to the community or different ways?
Well, there's tons of ways to contribute, and even the Microsoft MVP program does look at this. I mean, some people contribute a lot by speaking and writing. That's me. There's a lot of people who don't like to speak and write, so they contribute other ways by participating in chat group, in online technical forums and things like that. Microsoft likes that. So there's lots. If you're more of an introvert than I am, there's other ways you can contribute, right? And by doing things like that, or just talking one-on-one with somebody, right? I was giving talks at a user group my first year I was a software developer, right?
Okay,
so, and yeah, I didn't know a lot, but I was pushing myself to do that, right? Because that was my way of forcing myself to become better, right? Because I always felt if I had to stand in front of people and speak, I better halfway know what I'm talking about, right? And so it kind of forced me. And even when I taught at university, I would actually pick classes I didn't know how to teach, right? Because it forced me to learn that technology so I could teach it, right? So that's the way I do it. It's by forcing myself to do things.
I hope picking up the classes you didn't knew. I hope students were a little lenient and didn't roast you much because sometimes they would just ask questions that hey you're not a professor for this lecture, so let's just go and ask him the tough questions.
Oh, I didn't tell them that. I didn't tell them I didn't know what
Okay,
I was talking about.
you were pretty confident, right?
You have to just
That's
show the
great.
confidence, right?
Right. So you just told one of your secrets, one of your confessions. So so you did. One thing that I really like about that David, you did talk about the forums, right? If you can write articles, if you're not good at public speaking, forum is something you can always contribute. People ask
Yes.
tons of questions over there, and even if you're just 1 years of experience or in any of the technologies you're working or a software developer, you definitely can answer some of the questions, right? If we have forums on Microsoft, we have forums on CSharpCorner, right? People like to just, and we have some of the MVPs at CSharpCorner who have just got this award by just contributing on the forum,
Right.
right? Not everyone is very good at writing articles. Not everyone can come live and have all this equipment with us, but definitely forum is one thing that people may miss sometimes. They definitely miss sometimes. I think they will. People do miss forums a lot of times to contribute, and I think that is definitely one way to just go
Yeah.
ahead and contribute.
And
And
and in the beginning, in my beginning, that's the way I did it. My besides the user group, my very first like online community thing I did was something that most of you probably never heard about, and I was a forum moderator on CompuServe.
never heard of it.
Yeah, see, CompuServe was pre-internet.
Okay.
And yeah, so I was a forum moderator on CompuServe, and that one thing, right, hooked me to so many other professionals higher in my world that they liked me and then started helping me, right? But and I'm talking about people that are well-known people now, right? They helped me back then, right? But that was because I was participating in the CompuServe forum. Otherwise, I would have never known them
Yeah.
without it, right? So now we have the internet. It's way easier now than paying for CompuServe, right?
Yeah.
But yeah, that's how I got my start. Really, now that I think about it, was the forums. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think you connect globally, and any questions asked in the forum, there are multiple responses, and you even get to learn in the process that hey, the answer that you have given, there are a lot more better approaches, right? So that definitely works out, and I think forum is one way. If you're not good writing at articles, you can definitely go and get started with forums. If you're down to David. 2 minutes and 15 seconds, right? So we are on time, right? We have just wrapped it on time. Let's talk about David on literally how to become a Microsoft MVP, right? So there might be certain stages, there might be a certain steps that one has to follow. I see you have been a Microsoft MVP for a really long time. So how was your experience during this program, and what would you suggest anyone who wants to be a Microsoft MVP, and what are the benefits that you get?
Wow, that's a lot more than I can talk about in 2 minutes. But
No, you can we can definitely
but
extend.
if you want to get started, becoming a MVP is you have to have community reach somehow, right? Most every single Microsoft MVP has a community reach. That's why Microsoft likes us, right? Because
Mhm.
we can get the word out there. We can help other people. We can promote Microsoft technologies, things like that, right? But you have to get involved with the community, and even writing books is part of that, right? Any way to get the
Yeah.
word out about Microsoft technologies, that's what Microsoft likes to see. And then it's easier to become an MVP. Now, the other thing about becoming at least an MVP in the programming part of the MVP program, because there's MVPs in like Xbox and stuff like that too, right? So
Yeah.
I'm not talking about them, but usually become an MVP, Microsoft is recognizing you not only for your community work, but they're recognizing you for your expertise, right? They're basically vouching for you. It's like, to me, it's the best thing you can get from Microsoft, right? Because they're vouching for you. And not only do they vouch for you, they vouch for you every year. Because every year we get re-awarded. So I just this week got re-awarded my 14th award, right? And so Microsoft makes sure that we're always doing basically what they want us to, right? And
Yeah.
and not that I don't complain about Microsoft all the time, right?
Yeah.
I don't toe that line that close, but you basically need to somehow have community reach, and you need to be an expert in your field or close to an expert.
Yeah, definitely, and I don't think you can just become an MVP like 1 or 2 years of experience. As you said,
Yeah,
not just a community reach. You need to have an expertise so that people can look up to you. That hey, there's a new feature of an Azure functions, and hey, this MVP can, if he's giving a talk in a particular meetup, he's really gonna cover some really crux of that new features that are launched and built or any new features, right? So having an expertise, I think that's one thing other than just having a reach. I mean, one can have reach on social media, that's perfectly fine, right? But if you don't have a good expertise in your bag in your technology, and I think it's going to be a little tough to get an
yeah,
MVP award, right?
yeah.
And it feels good, right? You work many people work 9 to 5, and then you give your time for all this community work, and eventually there's someone recognizing it, and then you have all these your MVP summits where you get to meet your fellow MVPs, one of the event that people really wait all along the year. Probably it couldn't happen this year at Microsoft. David,
No,
you was that?
yeah, I know. And I
It
didn't
was
go last
virtual
year either,
though.
so I haven't been in 2 years. So
Uh,
I'm really looking forward to next year. I don't think there's an announcement yet, but yeah,
yeah.
I really want to go next year for sure.
I
Once
hope
this
things go
pants,
well. Yeah,
it
and they don't do it virtually. This time it happened virtually, and people really that's not good,
was
right,
pretty
David?
bad. Yeah, it was. I think I watched a couple sessions and gave up.
I'm gonna edit this part, David.
Well, I mean, part of the MVP summit is networking, right? And that's one
Exactly.
thing I
Yeah.
talk
Yeah.
a lot about is when I go to these events, I don't go to talks and stuff like that. I network, right?
Hmm.
And especially at the MVP conference, because you're surrounded by the top people in your industry, right?
Yeah.
I've
Yeah.
gone to dinner and I've had one-on-one conversations with the heroes in my world, right? Not Bill Gates, but
Yeah.
lots of other heroes in my world. I've been able to sit down and talk to and have dinner. I've sat down and had dinner with the architect of C Sharp. You know,
Oh
and
wow.
and you don't get to do that if you don't either know him or you're not a Microsoft MVP,
Yeah.
basically, right? So
Yeah, so definitely that part was missed. I think this time is very tough.
yeah,
Might be all are doing virtual, so somehow they managed to do it. But I hope things go well, and we all can do in person C Sharp on the annual conference, and definitely the MVP summit that we do. Right. So that's being well said, David. We're almost on time now. So any we had an amazing session about solution architect. We talked about different challenges one faces. You did cover what are the roles and responsibility of a solution architect, some of the best principles practices. We talked about how does a day in the life of a solution architect is. You also discussed about some of your projects. You also discussed about how what is a journey to become a solution architect. That's a lot to be taken away in this just brief 1 hour time. And let's not forget, you have also covered about some of the benefits of MVP program, this community work, and also that we had a really amazing session, David. Really, really, let us tell everyone behind the scenes we were expecting a presentations, and we just thought how this should go, right? And it has been really amazing sessions. Guys have been really interacting and asking questions in the comments. So looks like we have very interactive sessions. David, anything that you want to say before I just wrap it up?
yeah, I want to say so it's on the video that I want to say thanks to C Sharp Corner and especially Mahesh and you and everybody else at C Sharp Corner, especially the poor people that have to edit my articles. Um, I would have, I've been working with C Sharp Corner for 3 years now, and it's been immensely beneficial to me and getting my reach, like helping more people, right? So I really want to say thanks to the whole team at C Sharp Corner. Um, so thank you very much. I hope there's going to be many more years coming.
Yep.
The other thing I want to say real quick is I hope everybody is staying safe with the pandemic. I know it's beginning to rage out of control again here in America. I don't know what's going on with you guys, but please listen to your local officials. Please do what they say, and please stay safe because I want to see you next year when I come to India. Right? I don't want to lose anybody. Okay.
Yeah, that's so nice of you, David. Indeed, I mean, this time is very tough. It's exactly this COVID-19 is just increasing. But we have to get used to it. We have to do work from home. We have to do all these virtual events as often. I think we had a really great time with you. I'm seriously gonna invite you very soon on the live show. This time on a coffee with pros, where we talk not just technical. We're not gonna talk technically in the next live show. It will be a normal chit chat. So once again, David, thank you so much for your time, especially on this weekend. I, Stephen Simon, as the host of the show, I felt this was one of the most interacting sessions that we had, and I would really like to thank you on behalf of entire C Sharp Corner community and its millions of users. And just thank you so much, David. Have a great day ahead, and see you soon.
Thank you very much, everybody, for coming.